welcome to the second annual Morehouse College Human Rights Film Festival. Thank you all for attending this conversation. I'm Dr. Stephane Dunn, the Academic Program Director for Cinema, Television, and Emerging Media Studies at Morehouse, and part of the wonderful planning committee with the Human Rights Film Festival. And today I'm really excited because we're in conversation with one of my favorite people in and outside of Hollywood, not just in. He is really an extraordinary producer. He is a ball of wonderful energy, and I'm glad that we're able to let you eavesdrop on one of the many conversations that we have about his career in Hollywood. So please welcome master producer. Although he's worn many hats, he is distinguishing himself as a master producer, Mr. Datari Turner. Hello, good afternoon,
Hey,
sir.
Stephanie, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure when we get a chance to talk and talk about what we love to talk about most, and that's film and movies.
So, fellow cinephile, I just want you to take us just a little bit through being nobody in Hollywood, meaning you're on the outside of this thing with ambitions, and then suddenly you're inside. Can you take us through the trajectory, please, of your kind of entryway into Hollywood?
Yeah, I mean, the short of it, I moved to LA in 2002 to be a writer. I was living in New York before that and had lived there during 9/11, and was really thinking about my future and what I was passionate about. I've always been passionate about movies, but as a black kid from Richmond, California, in the Bay Area, Hollywood might as well have been in Dubai. It didn't seem realistic. So 2000, there's the end of 2002, moved to Los Angeles. I get myself a small little apartment and I got an air mattress, I got a writer's table, and I went to the Samuel French bookstore and I bought a Hollywood creative directory. Mind you, this is before social media. And it had all of the production companies listed in this book, all the studios. And then I went to Kinko's because, we weren't really emailing scripts at the time. I went to
Of course.
Kinko's and I printed out 100 scripts and I drove all around Hollywood to all of the production companies and personally dropped my script off in person. And I still think back to that. It was just so funny because, I didn't have a mentor, and a lot of, black kids, we don't, Hollywood wasn't built by people that look like us. So we don't have sometimes the luxury of being connected and having people to tell you the right ways to do things and the proper ways to do things. And
So I gather the screenplay dropping off was not quite
that's
the
not the
way.
way. But it's so great when I think back on it now because I would see the head of the studio in this creative directory. They had all the phone numbers, and I would call the head of the studio and thinking that he really was gonna call me back. But I was very, very ambitious and very determined, and I ended up getting my script option, and which helped me get a literary agent and an attorney. And as I started reading, I've always been fascinated with Hollywood and movies, and as I started reading, books, I read the Last Mogul, the Lou Wasserman book, and The Operator. David Geffen buys and sells in New Hollywood, and just reading all of these books about Jack Warner, who founded Warner Brothers with his brothers in the early 1900s. What I realized was that the producers were the most powerful people in Hollywood. They built it. They were the richest people. They back in the old studio days, the actors would be signed to producers who had to monitor their weight, tell them what they could eat and what they couldn't, and their name was, above the title of the film. And so um, that felt like it just felt like I could be, I could help so many more people by being a producer. God could use me to help other filmmakers, get their stories made. And that's the great thing about being a producer is that you can work on so many movies at one time. You can make so many movies, in a year. When you look at a lot of the great producers, They have 50 to 60 projects in development, and that was really appealing to me. It felt like a better use of my skill set. But I'm really happy that I started out as a writer, because that helped me to be able to read a lot of material, that helped me to be able to problem solve scripts and to work with writers to I can see something that's not fully to the finish line yet, and still be able to see the potential of it, and in a lot of ways be able to give great creative notes. So
I
that
love
that
that.
that
Mhm.
was great for me to start that way, to be honest.
I love that you're saying that because I think so often it's underrated the relationships there, right? Between screenwriting and even if you're a producer needing to sell the story or help to develop the story
Yeah,
for distribution, having the eye, the thoughtfulness, the care for that is really important.
absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit before we segue here. So it's one thing to decide I'm going to be a master producer too, have my name on the marquee, and another thing to get there. So first project.
So my first project was a movie I wrote called Video Girl, and what's really great about that is that no one was going to let me produce anything, because I hadn't produced anything. So the thing that you produce is the thing that you write, right? Like, so I had my screenplay. And once I decided that I was going to be a producer, I had tried. We took a lot of swings, tried to get a studio to make the movie. And what was I chose Video Girl because I seen a movie called Gia that Angelina Jolie had did, and it really struck a chord with me. And when I read the first book I read on writing was that you should write about something that you knew, and I had knew a lot of music video girls because of my previous career, and I knew sort of the business was the media was glamorizing being a video girl. Like, the notion was that, all you had to do was get in the music video, and that would lead to you becoming Holly Berry. And I feel like, Hollywood does that, and what makes people want to come here and think that all they have to do is just get in one thing and then they'll be famous and so forth. So that's what made me write that story. And during that time, dance movies were really popular. All the studios were making You Got Served and Stomp the Yard and Save the Last Dance. And so that felt like a fresh way into the kind of movies that the studios were making at the time. But Video Girl was just a little darker. And after taking some swings, and I had at one point 50 Cent was interested in getting involved, in Queen Latifah. And after none of the situations quite panned out, I had a friend who basically said, well, if you have Megan Good attached to your project and you have Ruby D attached to your project, I have a guy who will finance the movie. The only thing is you have to shoot it in Louisiana, which at that point was the big place to shoot for tax credits. Now Georgia has sort of become the reigning champion in terms of film production. But at that point, it was Louisiana. And so I had never thought about making the movie independent. I always thought it was going to be a studio film. So I fly down to Louisiana. I meet with the guy. They show me proof of funds. The money turns out to be real. And then now I have to actually go cook the sausage. Like, I have to actually go do it, right? And having never produced
Exactly.
anything, um, you know, take that back. I had, created and produced a few reality shows. I created a show called The Ultimate Hustler, which was one of BET's first unscripted shows, and had a deal with TV One, created I Married a Baller and Lisa Ray Real McCoy. So I did have a
But
knowledge
this
of
was a
production,
film, a
but not for
film.
film,
So
but not for film. But, so what I immediately did, was just started asking a lot of questions. I was, really leaned on filmmaker relationships I had. I was able to get a line producer to budget out the movie. And, I really just learned by like doing, just like really having to, produce this thing, put a budget together, open an LLC, getting references about department heads, and yeah, just really doing it. And by the grace of God, we got through the movie, and I wrote it, I produced it. Megan, was my producing partner, and I even had to be in the movie, and we ended up selling the E1 put out the movie theatrically and on home video. In BET, there was a woman named Laretha Jones who, when I first came to LA, she was working at MTV Films, and she pushed her boss to make the movie. And so when it came back around and I went and made it independently, she was at that time the president at BET, and they licensed the movie. And then Netflix wasn't making their own content yet, so then Netflix picked the movie up, and my investor got his money back. And so then I was off to the races. I was like, why did I wait all these years for a studio to tell me what was hot and tell me, to make my movie, when I could just go raise the financing and do it myself? And so I was empowered after that. In the year that I made Video Girl, it was a landmark year in Hollywood for independent film. Seven of the best picture of the 10 best picture nominees for the Oscars were all made independently. So The Kids Are All Right was an independently financed movie that went to Sundance, that I got nominated for multiple Oscars. Black Swan, which Natalie Portman won for, was an independently financed movie that premiered at the Venice Film Festival and got picked up after that. And then The King's Speech, which won Best Picture, was an independently financed movie as well. So it was sort of like a breakthrough. It was a turning point in our business, that independent film was, it was becoming a really big deal.
It's a really important conversation that you're bringing up. I mean, this is part of the Morehouse College Human Rights Film Festival, and obviously, the films are by and large primarily featuring independent filmmakers, obviously with a human rights sort of concern. But I wonder now, since in the years since Video Girl, and we've seen many now, per se, independent films, right, do well at awards and make a big splash. What does that mean now in Hollywood? I mean, if one says I'm an independent filmmaker, does it still have the same sort of connotations of being made outside of sort of big? Does it mean big studio support? Does it mean, what does that really mean now? Some years after Girl, and some years now that we've seen quite a few independent films, right, really make a big splash and win. I can think of a number of them as well.
I think that, well, independent cinema has always been around. I mean, Melvin Van Peebles and John Cassavetes started independent
Back to
cinema.
that song, Hello and Watermelon Man.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. But yeah, it's always been around. But I think that, as with anything in the creative, in the creative field, things go in and out of vogue, right? And so I think during that time, um, independent film was a really big thing. It was emerging because the studios weren't making very many black movies too. They were, I think at that time, 2010, you pretty much had Rainforest, which was Will Packer's company, and Rob Hardy's company at Screen Gems at the time, and Tyler Perry, who was at Lionsgate. So, studios had really stopped making. It wasn't the '90s. They weren't. Every studio wasn't bullish on telling our stories. So a lot of the movies that you've seen within the last 10 years, whether it was The Butler or Fruitvale Station or The Middle of Nowhere, which was Ava's movie that she won Best Director for at Sundance. All these movies were made independently. I think we're in a different place now in the business with all of the streamers, with Netflix and Apple, because at that time Netflix wasn't making their own content. So they really relied on independent films. Those are the movies that they would license and buy from
Good point.
festivals. But now that they're making their own content, and now you have Apple and you have Amazon and you have HBO Max, um, it's getting harder. It's getting harder and harder to to make an independent film, because the streamers want to own the content. And if you make it independently, even when they buy it, it's a license. They'll never own it because they didn't finance it, you know.
Sure,
And so, um, I think that as a guy who has primarily worked in the independent space over the last decade, it was really great for me. I mean, I prefer staying independent because it allowed me to take a lot of swings. It allowed me to make a lot of different kind of films. It allowed me to not get boxed in for making one particular type of movie, because what happens is when you do a studio deal, when you go under Paramount or Lionsgate or Sony, and you make a hit movie, the studios want you to keep reproducing, a similar movie. And
sure,
so,
sure.
for me, it was just it really, I don't think I would be the producer that I am today had I not stayed independent and been
Mhm.
able to just make so many kinds of movies. Shoot a movie in one take. Make a movie on an iPhone with a filmmaker named Matthew Cherry, who won an Oscar this year.
Your
um
love.
exactly. To make a little small movie called Another Happy Day with a filmmaker named Sam Levingston, who
Mhm.
created Euphoria,
Sure.
and just sold, had one of the biggest sales in the last 10 years with his movie that stars John David Washington and Zendaya, which Netflix just bought for $30 million. So, I was able to just really cultivate so many great filmmaker relationships. I was able to get behind filmmakers before Hollywood really bought into them.
And
And
actresses like one Meghan Markle,
oh, for sure,
like
for
one Miss
sure.
Markle.
Casting Meghan Markle in one of her first things in Dysfunctional Friends, putting Michael Rainey Jr. in Love, who's having a lot of success on Power right now. Casting Ryan Destiny and a girl like Grace, who's, just really giving actors, a platform, and filmmakers as well. So that's what I'm really, grateful for and proud of the most.
So right now, pretty extraordinary moment when we think about it, with the latest evolution of the human rights Black freedom struggle in this country, which is in Black Lives Matter, as we speak. And of course, you and I have been
Black
fighting this
Lives Matter.
battle. Yes, Black Lives Matter. Of course, we've been fighting this battle for a long time in terms of Hollywood, and we've had various periods, right? Before Oscar So White and all of that and so forth. We know that Hollywood represents, and it is a manifestation of the larger society. It perpetuates the same white supremacist patriarchal culture that American government and its other social institutions represent. It's been a massively influential, right, form of entertainment and form of business that really helps to sustain systems of power in this country. We know that back from the founding brothers and white European brothers who basically built the first early houses, studio houses, from MGM to the Warner Brothers to Paramount. And with those first films, all of them from The Birth of a Nation, through Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer, and beyond that. So the work that Hollywood then is expected to do in helping to transform itself, to transform that racist, patriarchal system is a lot. And it's really, really important because it has such a mass influence, because it represents so much the mirror, right? The psyche of American society. You've talked about this a lot in the press recently. There's the wonderful Los Angeles Times article where you're talking about transforming Hollywood. And of course, you and I have had these conversations over and over again. So, talk to me a little bit about what needs to shift and how.
Yeah, well, for me, I think it's a really simple thing. I think that we want to see at the table as people of color. And I think the only way for that to happen is that, like, we can't, every time the Oscars or the Emmys happen and we don't have any nominees, just say Oscars so white and make a lot of noise on social media. Like, you know, that is just, and then next year they'll give us more nominees, right? Like, but that's just a quick band-aid, you know, that doesn't solve the problem. And you're still always going to be at the mercy of, when they feel like having a lot of black nominees, they'll do it, and when they don't, then they won't. And the only way to really fix that is to, you know, you have to fix things at the root of the business. And, you know, when you think about, you know, the institutions that were created by the founding members in Hollywood. You talk about Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith, which that movie obviously, you know, ignited the KKK, and you know, did a lot of damage, you know, with for, you know, black people's, the image of black people in this country. But also, D.W. Griffith was, most people don't know this, was one of the founding members to start the USC Film School. And
Indeed.
you know, when you start to really think about it, you know, again, this business wasn't built, Hollywood wasn't built by people that look like us, and it wasn't built for us. But what we have to do now is we have to, you know, create a program. I've been really passionate about creating this producing program, in the same way that Ray Stark did, you know. And you know what he was able to do at USC is create this producing program and name it after his son, Peter Stark. And that program has really served as, you know, a farm system for, you know, the three triangles of power, you know, the triangle of power in Hollywood. And that is talent agents, the studio heads, and obviously producers. And, you know, most of the people that come out of the Peter Stark program go on to be prolific producers in Hollywood, or go on to be, you know, very high up, you know, they go on to work in the C suites at studios, and go on to be talent agents and partners at the biggest agencies. And so what we have to do is we have to create that same program. Number one, you most people don't know what producers actually do. So, you know, we've always been talent from the beginning of time. We've always been great entertainers. And then, you know, as Melvin and Spike Lee and Singleton came along, that, you know, that I always say to people, like, you have to be able to see it to know that you can do it. And once Spike and Melvin and, you know, Singleton and all of these guys came along, that made more black people want to be directors. You know, they saw that very clearly. I want to be Spike. I want to be John. I want to be Melvin. But no, the producer, no one knew what they did, you know, and you didn't really, they never really marketed that or had that in the forefront. So again, you had, you know, generations of people that went on to become prolific filmmakers and prolific actors, but people were sort of ignoring the producing part of it, which, by the way, if you look in Hollywood right now, most of the people that run the studios, Wick Godfrey at Paramount, Tom Rothman, who runs Sony, most of the people that run the studios were prolific producers first. So there's a connection to that.
Yeah, there's the pipeline. That's the
There's a
pipeline
pipeline. Like, they don't,
into.
the guys that run the studios were prolific. Scott Rudin, one of the all-time great producers, used to run 20th Century Fox. Jerry Bruckheimer's partner, Don Simpson, when they first started, was Simpson Bruckheimer. Don Simpson was the president of production at Paramount. So what
So
we
it's
have to
about
do,
being able to do that, to be able to come in and develop the path, the work, the skills that then lead to top ownership, top really control, the type of control we're talking about, where you can green light, you know, the stories you want to tell,
right,
and get them financed, and you know, get the talent attached. You know, this whole, because really, you know, a producer is a master networker, seller, a creative, a visionary, businessman, business person, I should say. I'm not going to use businessman because it does not escape me that we've mostly been talking about men, and so that goes double for women, particularly women of color and Black women in terms of getting into producing. So if it's hard for Black men, it's certainly doubly hard if one is Black and female, for example, trying to take the producer's route, to the top of the Hollywood studio system. All right.
Yeah, I think that producers have to be able to do a little bit of everything. That's a very blue collar job. But you have to have really great talent relationships if you want to be prolific. You have to be able to manage a budget, which is why most producers end up going to run, not most producers, but the best producers end up getting the opportunity to run a studio, because if you can handle a budget, then you can handle, a studio budget. If you've been very successful at that, and so there is they go hand in hand. And in order for things to change, we have to, we've had a Black president in the United States before we've had a Black person run a studio in Hollywood. We
Well,
haven't had any, Black partners at the biggest talent agencies in the world. I mean, WME and CAA are, they probably control 90% of the talent in the world, writers, directors, actors. And we don't have any, partners at those agencies that are Black. Obviously, so when you think about the studio system, when you think about the talent agencies, we have to have, all we want is a seat at the table. We have to have a voice and know, at that level of decision making in order for things to change. And if we don't, if more people, but that starts too with more people wanting to be a talent agent. David Geffen, who's the richest person in the entertainment business, worth $8 billion. He started out in the mailroom at William Morris. So many people started out in the mailroom at William Morris, and so
or dropping off their screenplays and driving around and calling studio hits until they understood something else about the process, like one Datari Turner, right? But you're saying some really important things in terms of that pipeline and the investment that's needed to groom people to even know what it is so they can want to be it. Because you didn't want to be it until you understood what it was, producing,
exactly,
and who they were in
exactly,
Hollywood. And then that's why the shift came, from the writing. Speaking
exactly.
of that, you've continued to make projects because of it nonstop. And one of the latest, which is showing at the Morehouse College Human Rights Film Festival, is Death of a Telemarketer, which I really like the title of a lot. And it has some really interesting moral and psychological implications to that story. Talk to us about it a little bit.
Well, I'm really excited about that film, and it aligns with my mission statement of always getting behind first time filmmakers, giving filmmakers opportunities. There's a young filmmaker, Khalid Ridgway, who wrote it and directed it, and went to USC. And this is a young gentleman that I thought has a lot of talent, and I wanted to get behind him. It's sort of a play on Death of a Salesman, and it is about the moral compass of, like you know why this person is trying to do this, but at the same time in life, I think that a lot of times when you're so skilled and charismatic, and things come easy to you, you have the tendency maybe to try to take a shortcut or not try to work as hard because things have always come easy to you. So it's sort of a cautionary tale about that. We have a terrific cast. Lamar Morris, who was just in Bloodshot with Ben Diesel. He's got a big show he stars in on Hulu called Woke. Alicia Wainwright, who is on Raising Dion with Michael B. Jordan on Netflix. We got Jackie Earl Haley, who was a former Oscar nominee for Little Children, and Haley Joel Osment, who was nominated for an Oscar in The Sixth Sense when he's a kid. We just got a really, really, really brilliant cast. Woody McClain, who's on Power and played Bobby Brown in the Bobby Brown story. Matt McGorry, who was on How to Get Away with Murder. So the cast is pretty lit. But I really enjoyed making the movie. You know, and you served as an associate producer on the film as well. I was happy we got a chance to work together on that. And the movie won the audience award at ABFF, and so I'm really excited about it. I think really excited about the filmmaker's future. I think he's going to have a bright career as a filmmaker.
Well, I'm really excited about you and your work. What you just did, to even to me, is what you do, and you've kind of been a sounding board as I've gotten my first screenplay optioned, really, and so forth. And it's been great having such an experienced person to have here. So I really appreciate that a lot. And I think that's a part of what you do when you're changing the trajectory of Hollywood. The mentorship and the getting into people's corners it just cannot be underrated, because so many of us have, suffered from our talents or our creativity, right? Being able to be shown and championed because we haven't been mentored in or taken,
Yeah.
no one's taken us under the wing and done that shepherding. And this festival really is trying to do that by really highlighting lots of independent filmmakers, many of them who are taking on some really important human rights issues of the day. I wanted to ask you before we close out of here for you, what's the human rights story that is speaking to you or that has spoken to you that you've either done or you really have it in your soul to do, that really, really intersects, right, with a really important social justice matter for you?
I think for me, I just want to like the reason why it's so important to champion stories, and for a lot of times people, and I think it's by design too. I think people look at Hollywood and they say, oh, that's just Hollywood out there, those creative people out there, and they sort of downplay it like it's not as important as curing cancer, and being a doctor is actually just as important. And in some instances, I mean, I'm not going to say it's more important, but, Hollywood creates the imagery for the world.
And
You
create
know,
change,
they,
right?
they,
And
they,
create change, right?
they, exactly. And I mean, when you think about the problems that we have with police, it's really because of Hollywood. It's because you've never seen a movie. Most of the movies that we grew up on, Police Academy and Beverly Hills Cop and Bad Boys, and you go through all the TV shows, Dragnet and CSI and Chips, and I mean you can go through Miami Vice. Like the cops' moral compass in these shows and movies was always impeccable. They never put their knee on a black man's neck for no reason. They
Sure.
never police brutalized anybody that didn't break the law or really do something really bad. And so most people grow up, especially if they're not a person of color, they grow up thinking that cops don't do things like that. You had to do something really bad for that to happen to you. And it's just not true. And I think for me, my human rights thing as a producer is just to tell stories that are going to show my people in a good light, and bring awareness to things that need awareness brought to them. And I think that's what we need to do with our art. I mean, movies, we all grow up on images. That's what we grow up on. We remember the first movie we saw somebody kiss, somebody hug, somebody cry, somebody die. We don't see people die in real life. We see people die in the movies, like for the most part. And so, movies shape our reality. They shape how we view the world.
And
They
with
shape
our humanity, don't they? Because it kind
exactly.
of facilitate an emotional response. It's like seeing, when we talk about movies that we care about. I mean, why did we rush out and buy African print to wear to Black Panther, or why do we have such a reaction or to Ryan Coogler's, first film, Fruitvale, which is one of the few films, to your point, that actually represents police brutality from the perspective, right, of the person that was victimized by the community. It's a community perspective, but there's really, up until that point, almost, as you say, the narratives don't necessarily represent all of the human rights sorts of issues that are now being represented as everyday, right? But
Yeah.
but in part, it's because, as you say, Hollywood is so influential that it can create a reality per se. It can create what people perceive to be the reality, so that some miles away, like, people can think different things about race or about people of color because they've seen Hollywood movies.
Yeah, I mean, Boys in the Hood had a profound, effect on me. I think I was maybe 12 when that movie came out, but my dad was Lawrence Fishburne. He's the same dad, same kind of dad, and you know, that was one of the first movies where I saw a black man being a great father on screen, because you don't really see that. They usually, movies are about our fathers not being around, or about our pain that we're going through, for somebody that wasn't a good father, and that was one of the first movies where it really had a profound effect on me. And you think about those things. You think about, we grew up in a very similar area, in the Bay Area. I actually grew up in the same city that Ryan Coogler grew up. And but that was the same area. That area is Compton. That area is Baltimore. That area is DC. It's a tough area. So you had to have great parents that were like all up in your mess to make sure that you turned out the right way. But anyway, like, I just, images and film, they just have such a big effect on the world, and the way people are, view, race and everything. And so we got a lot of work to do. Me, you, and all of the people that are creating content to be authentic and tell the right stories and make sure the right stories are made. So
Thank you. Datari Turner, I'm really excited about all the work that you're going to do, all the collaborations we're going to do together in the future. And I'm also all very excited about the Morehouse College Human Rights Film Festival. Virtual, live, it is the place to be. You will see amazing filmmakers taking on contemporary and historical issues in amazing storytelling mode. So please watch, please join. Datari Turner, we're all going to keep watching you. The gaze is upon you, my brother. And so we will be watching not only Death of a Telemarketer, but we will watch you as you help to change the trajectory in Hollywood. We appreciate you very much. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me.
thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you to the Morehouse Human Rights Film Festival for, being a part of this, wonderful festival. I know so many voices, creative voices, are going to come out of here and, help change the world. And there's no festival that I would rather be a part of than to be here and talking with you. So thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited and humbled to be here.
Thank you.